So what I'd like to do is hear from our delegation and then dispose of it, receive his letter, and he can be on his way. Okay, so seeing no other changes, can I get a motion? So moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Mayor Bailey. All in favor? Opposed, none? Okay, declaration of pecuniary interest, of course, please do so if you see you have one. And delegations petitions, as discussed. Derry, I'm going to get you to come up.
Good evening.
Just
Yes.
hold on, before you start, just introduce yourself and where you live, just for the
Yeah,
clerk.
Dairy Christians, 411 Norwich Road, which is just around the corner from this property that we're discussing. We bought this property a number of years ago, and it has an irrigation pond that has no value to me, as I don't irrigate crops there anymore, and it has become a liability issue over the last number of years with kids on four-wheelers and stuff in there floating through the water on the four-wheelers. It's a bit of an issue. So I have been filling this pond in for approximately 5 to 7 years already with some fill I get from a local contractor that paves driveways in Woodstock. Clean fill, no garbage allowed. And now I'm in the midst of being stopped because of things that happened in county elsewhere. And I feel that I don't need to be obliged to pay this fee because I had started this project quite a few years before it came in. And I'm only doing it for a liability aspect. I want to get rid of this liability. I don't want any issues with people going in that pond and drowning. And like I said, it's of no value to me anyway, so let's fill it in. The original dirt is there, but to retrieve the original fill, I would have to take out quite a few large trees because they have grown up through the fill pile. So this is why I bring dirt in. And I'm very fussy on the dirt. It is not contaminated like these other issues that happened in the county. I don't allow it, and anything I find that I don't agree with, I pull it out of the pile of dirt and I will dispose of it properly. There's, metal or whatever's in there. So, and these are the reasons why I want this bylaw to be exempt from the fee for me, because I've already been doing this for quite a few years. And, now that this has come in, I don't feel I should be obligated to pay this fee, which is quite substantial. So, those are basically all the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing, so.
Okay, anything else you want to?
No, that should be about it. It's just a safety issue more than anything, so.
Okay, what I'm going to do then, Mr. Christians, is I'll turn it over to the committee if there's any
Yep.
questions. Okay. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor House?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a quick one. How many years have you been filling this thing in?
Basically started after we bought the property, so that's got to be about 8 years, 7 to 8 years ago, and, slowly got more and more fill coming in. And if I have clean fill of my own, I use it too, but I'm just trying to help out a local paving company there that's just around the corner, and he brings me clean fill.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor Ferrier?
Through you, Mr. Chair. And how long do you think until you're probably done?
How fast can he bring the fill? He brings me probably 40 loads a year, roughly. And if, like I said, if I find clean fill of my own somewhere, I'll bring it as well. So we're getting close. I think probably a couple of years we should have it done.
Okay, less than 8?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, and a question for me, just a question of clarification. Where you're located, it's LPRCA regulated, and they've signed off on you filling in the pond.
Yes, I went to both Grand River and Long Point Region, and they both agreed to Natural Resources, to take the wetland status off the property. It should never have been there. They both agreed with me on it. They don't know how it ever happened. It's not a wetland. The pond is the wetland, and that's it.
Okay, and so what you're saying, you started 7, 8 years ago, but I believe what you're saying is you started prior to the fill bylaw coming in.
Oh, yes,
Here,
yes, way before.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, and we'll deal with that.
Yeah, great, thank you very much.
Okay, so what we'll do, before we dispose of the delegation, we'll get 10A on the item, and that is the letter from Mr. and Mrs. Christians. Can I get a mover to receive that letter? Okay, moved by Councillor Coleman, second by Councillor Goward. All in favor? Okay. As far as the delegation goes, I'd like a motion from the floor on how they wish to deal with the request. Councillor Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that we grant the delegation the request that we waive all fees on this, seeking a seconder.
Councillor Gatward, you had your hand up. Did you want to second that? Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Okay, yeah, we'll go with you then, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was back there when this original fill bylaw was created, somewhat. And it was, and you, I think you were there too. And it's always been a controversial subject, but I always thought we were waiving the fees if it's for agriculture purposes of filling in those holes in the field to reclaim the land or whatever. So when I read the letter, I was a little bit concerned by it, so I appreciate the delegation coming.
And we probably should get some clarification on that, because if certain staff think we should be charging it for everybody, and we're of the opinion that we shouldn't be charging it for agricultural purposes, yeah, we need to definitely clarify that. I don't know who to turn that over to.
Mr. Chair, through you, I can clarify. There is no exemption from the permit fee for any use. There was some discussion, and there have been some requests that came to committee in the past about certain potential exemptions, but we have never received direction to do that. So the original fill bylaw that was presented to council, I think in 2017, I'm thinking maybe early 2018, stands, and it doesn't provide any options for waivers. So if committee wanted to direct us to review that, we're doing a review of the fill bylaw now. It has some flaws, although it has worked well. And if I could just add, Mr. Chair, the purpose of the fill bylaw is to get permits for these things so that we know that the fill coming into the county is clean, that we know where it's being trucked from, that we can address road damage issues, which has been a fairly significant concern in many fill operations, so that we can get clarity on the volumes, and that we can identify any environmental impacts from those fill operations. That's a primary reason for the permit, to have a permit, and we continue to believe that's good business for the municipality. The fee structure is certainly open to council for your consideration, and we would take your direction on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just, and I just want to add to that, because as far as fills and fill bylaws go, there's been some provincial initiatives. It was in one of our packages last month, so actually it's a good thing we're reviewing that, because like I say, provincially, the legislation has changed. Okay, we'll go to Councillor LaFerriere.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'm not sure who to direct this to, but it seems to me that part of the reason for granting this, if we choose to grant it, is around the idea that almost being grandfathered in because it started under a previous rule. It's looking at before the fill bylaw, and now we're in a different zone. Is that something that maybe we can either chat with staff about or look at options for when this report comes in about that specific scenario?
Okay, so not about this specific case, but about that in general?
Cases where it started under the old rules and now is being transferred into the new rules, and to make that more feasible or less painful to the folks who've been doing this in earnest for a long period of time.
Yeah. Michael, I think we could add that. Not that, I don't know how many there'd be, but I imagine there'd be a couple.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, and I don't believe there's too many. So it's important to remember that there was a fill bylaw that preceded the current site alteration bylaw, and actually I spoke with staff today, and we believe that this operation actually wouldn't have been allowed under the old fill bylaw. It was quite restrictive, but it had no permit process. So this project might have been occurring, in contravention of that bylaw, noting that we weren't aggressively enforcing that old fill bylaw. Its primary design was for large commercial fill operations to prevent those. So under the new fill bylaw, it is allowed, but there's a permit attached to it, and that's the new site alteration bylaw. The idea is to allow these things, but make sure that we had good controls over them.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilor McAlpine?
Just for clarification, because I've come across a couple in our area where people are filling in, okay, and they were stopped, from my understanding, because they were excessive. We're proposing to waive the fees, but we would still want to monitor what he's bringing in, wouldn't we, in this case?
Through you, Mr. Yeah, it would be our suggestion that you should not waive the requirement for the permit. You should only waive the requirement for the fee. The permit continues to allow you to ensure that fill coming into the municipality is clean, that trucking routes are established, that environmental impacts are addressed, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not suggesting that the permit be waived, only I think that what the request is, and what we would certainly we have no objection to, would be the fee being waived, so.
Okay, so that's just what I want to clarify.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, and just to clarify again, we're talking waiving the fees like in the past or permanently going forward? What are we looking at here?
If I go to Brian, I think you're looking at waiving the fees, all the fees. For the, yeah, and not for everybody. But having said that, as per what Mark was saying, we will be looking at that as part of the review for, you know,
Right, so until this, we'll call it a project, until this project is completed, there will be no fees for this particular person. Is that what we're talking here? Okay, thank you.
and as the presenter pointed out, I think he's looking at 2 years, so. Okay, any other speakers? Okay, seeing none, the motion's straightforward. Do you want to read it, Heather?
The motion is that the County of Brant approve the request to waive the fill permit fees as outlined in correspondence from Dermot and Julia Christians.
Okay. No other discussion, no questions? I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, thank you. So, to Mr. Christians, this decision will go to council at the end of this month, which is January 28th for final approval, okay? So, thank you.
One thing, can I bring dirt in now?
At this point, as long as you got a permit, we still need you. Yes, we still need a permit, but we're going to waive the fees at this point.
My contractor has a stockpile of dirt at his place, it would like out.
Okay. We haven't waived the fees yet until January 28th officially, just so you know. Just so you know. But you still need a permit, so I would get in and get that. Okay. This brings us to item 5A, adoption of the minutes from the previous meetings. Can I get a motion to adopt those minutes? Mark, and followed by local Councillor Bell. Any questions, omissions, errors? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? None? Any business arising from those minutes? And I know we have that listed every meeting we go to, business arising from the minutes, but don't ignore it. It's a good way to keep an item alive. As I've done at Public Works. Okay, this brings us to the consent items. We got 7A1. Can I get a mover for Christine's motion, recommendation? Okay, moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor House. Any questions or discussion on that? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. For my education, continuing education, why do we choose to have the collection of taxes on the cycle that we have and not literally every quarter? Because it comes back to one of the subsequent items where we have to produce a borrowing law which has two elements, one for the period when we're collecting taxes regularly, and then another period where, a 5 months period where we're collecting taxes somewhat over a somewhat shorter period. So I really just want to understand why we couldn't do it quarterly to make things easy. I actually support what's proposed here. I think it makes good sense, having gone through the budget.
Okay, and just to be clear, you're speaking specifically to 7A1 because there is a report there where they, from Heather about borrowing.
Yeah, the two are related.
Yeah, no, they are, so, I'll ask Christine. Heather's, oh, there's Heather, so. We'll try Christine, and then we might get Heather to flush it out. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the tax due dates are picked to correspond with the school board payments so that we have the money and we are able to make the payments for the school boards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. That takes us over to 7B. Now, there's 10 items there. There's 10 consent items to be received. Does anybody want any one of those pulled for a separate vote? Okay. Then, can I get a mover to receive all items, unless you wanted one pulled?
No, I just wanted to speak to 7B10.
Okay, yeah. Okay, but we don't need a pull, though. Was it because it's the minute, so, okay. All right, so, can I get a motion then to receive? Okay, we'll go with Counselor Howe, second by Counselor McAlpine. Okay, Counselor Guy, you had a question on 7B10, which I think we'll be kind of dealing with economic development a little later on, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, when I read the minutes from this meeting, I was quite puzzled why there's so much discontent on the committee, and members are resigning, and I guess I'd like to hear from the council member who's appointed to that committee why they're leaving and what he views the problem is on the committee.
Okay, Counselor House, we'll go to you. Can you give us a brief update on the committee?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Do you want a specific answer to the question about why the person in the minutes was mentioned has left the committee, or do you want to get into the whole
Well,
thing?
Okay, first of all, how many members have left? Just the one?
The one mentioned in the minutes has left due to a family health issue that we were all sensitive to and appreciated his situation. During the discussion in the December meeting where we were talking about format change, one of the people involved said that he didn't like the format change and would be intending to resign, but he didn't resign that day.
Okay, but I don't think we got to your whole, I don't think that's the whole answer you were asking. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What format change? There isn't one. The committee never voted on one.
Counselor, through the chair?
Pardon?
Through the chair, please?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm wondering what format change when the committee hasn't voted. They've had discussion about changing it.
I think,
by-
I think what Counselor
From
House
Councillor Howe's suggestions, but,
was referring to the proposed changes.
yeah.
I stand corrected. Indeed, it was a discussion about a recommendation regarding format change.
Okay. Counselor Gatward, any other questions on 7B10?
Other than,
Because it will come up later, don't forget.
yeah, I've heard that there's another letter being submitted of resignation, and I'm wondering where it is. Pardon?
Should we be discussing people's personal reasons for leaving any committee as public citizens in a public forum like this?
Probably not, no.
Oh,
So, but what we'll do, Counselor Gow, we won't speculate, but if the letter comes forward, then we'll deal with it, you know? We'll wait till we have it.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, we haven't mentioned any names, but I thought that this afternoon myself, but there's nothing in camera to talk about this, so,
Okay.
thank you.
But, no, fair enough, but we will be cautious.
but again, if I can speak to that.
Yep.
We're not mentioning any names at this table, but the names are in the minutes.
Yeah.
Which, we wouldn't do that if it was a staff member or a council member.
Yeah,
I don't know
I
that we
guess
should
there
do
is
it
that
for
link.
a member of the public who volunteers on a committee.
Okay. I think, yeah, we might be getting ahead of ourselves, so. Okay, any other items, any other questions or discussion on any of the other items? See none, I'll call the vote to receive. All in favor? Opposed? None? Okay, that brings us to A, committee reports. We have the Tourism Committee report, and there is one recommendation. So can I get a mover from the floor for that one? Moved by Councillor Coleman, second by, okay, Councillor Pierce. Any questions, discussions on that one regarding the mayor's celebration of culture? Mayor Bailey, you ready for this? I'm ready. Okay. You'll be put on the spot. Okay, seeing no questions, discussion, all in favor? None opposed? That brings us to number 9, staff reports, corporate services. There's no report per se from Robin tonight, but she is open to taking questions. Are there any questions for Robin? Okay, seeing none. I know she's got a lot she's working on. I expect we're going to see some reports shortly. Okay, this takes us to 9B operations. And there is a recommendation, 9B1, design build quotation for Two Rivers exterior wall, and this one's from Mr. Brown. Can I get a mover for this to get it on the floor? Okay, moved by Councillor McAlpine, second by Mayor Bailey. Questions? Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'm just curious, was there anything within this project that may have potentially scared some people off? Because it was only
One quote?
one quote received, and I'm just curious as to, was there reasons for that, or just there was only one?
Michael, can you help us with this one?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I can provide any reasons other than it's a unique project. Not a lot of, I mean, there's only so many contractors that are looking for this kind of work, so, because it is pretty unique, a lot of like artistic quality to the project, so we were happy, we got a good quote, and we think it's competitive, so.
Yeah, and so there was no issues with it, just the fact that there's not too many out there. Okay, thank you.
I know they've been working on this project for a while, so. It's actually going to make it quite nice, but any other questions? Okay, so there's a recommendation on the floor. We have it moved, seconded. All questions are done. All in favor? Do you have a question, John? Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, that brings us to 9B2, General Manager's Update. And Rob, you're one of the few guys with an update for us this evening.
Through the chair to committee. This is odd, I usually don't give many updates at this meeting, but I thought I'd bring everyone up to date on what's going on over the weekend. And first thing I'd like to do is give a shout out to all the county employees that worked very hard over the weekend. First with the potential of the rain / ice storm / rain, whatever it turned into, and now the flooding that we've had. So there was a lot of operations workers, communication staff and the like that were ready and out there to do the work that would need to be done. The Nith River is still rising, but we do anticipate that overnight that it will hit its peak and then start to recede. There's a number of roads which are still closed: Front Street in Onondaga, 5th Concession between 25 and Lawrence, Newport Road between Cockshut and River Road, and our Mechanic Street footbridge is closed because of the flooding in Lions Park. 2 other roads were closed but are now open: Norwich Road and Road 25 south of 53. We do have a number of parks which are closed too: Lions Park here in Paris, Art Cadman in Burford, Bean Park in Paris, and the river access at Glen Morris are all still closed at this time. So just thought I'd bring everyone up to date. Not great, but it looks like we should come through it relatively unscathed, thanks to the efforts of our operations staff. And the EOC obviously was never brought into play, but Kent Potriff was monitoring things with our operations staff over the weekend, and there's correspondence between our staff, Kent, and the City of Brantford staff as well. So good cooperation all around.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Any other updates before we go for questions?
No.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Walton? Rob, I got a question, and I did ask this at Public Works a little while ago. When we're looking at water over a road, we're not so much concerned about depth, or are we more concerned about the speed of, or the flow of the river, or the water going over? Like,
So
at what point do county staff should be or putting up a sign saying road on water, or another sign saying road on water, road closed? Like you said, some roads are closed. What is the determining factor for that? Because yeah, the Norwich Road citizen did call in about that one.
Yeah, we will pretty much close them as soon as the water is over the road for the fear of the person hydroplaning. At any depth of any appreciable depth of water, you can have hydroplaning of the vehicles. Yeah. And in our rural roads, most of the speed limit on a lot of it is 80 kilometers an hour. It's very easy to hydroplane at 80 kilometers an hour. When you get depth of water more than 30 centimeters or 1 foot, you can have vehicles which would have water coming into them, or the potential of it greater than that of them actually floating, which is a big problem. And then you also look at the speed and velocity of the water and where you might have potential to have erosion of the shoulders, or the whole surface of the road going away and there being gullies formed and the like so they'd be driving along, it wouldn't be so deep, and then all of a sudden you'd have an eroded spot and they could get stuck in there and then it'd cause big problems. So we're monitoring it as soon as we see anywhere where it's going over the road. Or even encroaching on the road where you'd have part of the road which was covered and then part of it which wasn't, because then you could, again, with the hydroplaning, that could happen.
Okay, so let me ask you, it's Saturday night, Councilor Pierce gets a phone call, says, John, there's all kinds of water on this street. What's he to do? You don't mind me singling you out? Who should he call?
We need to use our emergency number system, which you get it
Fire
through.
dispatch?
Which gets you to fire dispatch, and then they contact our staff.
Okay, and the staff will look at it, all right. And no further questions for Rob? Okay, Rob, thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow at 9.
Yes.
Okay, that'll bring us to C, Community and Protective Services. So the first one we have is an update for Leslie, and it's just for information, and I'll ask for a motion from the floor to get it on. Okay, moved by Mark, second by Councilor House. Leslie, is there anything in that report that you'd like to highlight? I'll go to the committee for questions, but it's a new program, and that's why there's a lot going on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee, I think that is the biggest thing I'd like to highlight, is that we are looking at the service now in 2 separate programs. So we're offering one that is offline and one that is online with the app. And that's just in response to our community and how they're responding to the program.
Okay, any questions for Leslie? We'll go that way. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, to Leslie.
I'll just stand here.
So if we're looking at a 30% inability to meet the rides that are demanded, but we've increased the fleet 100%, it sounds like. We're doubling the fleet over the next little bit. Do you feel like that will be adequate for at least the next 4 to 6 months to get a baseline of what our operations should be on this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I believe so. We're all confident in sort of the patterns that we've been tracking and the app, and then also the phone calls and communication with our users, that I think the vehicles we've now put on the road, the amping up the fleet, how we're communicating, I think all those things will meet the needs, yeah.
And would it be fair to maybe, I know in social work we look at this a lot, through you, Mr. Chair. We look a lot at, every month has its own flavor for, consumers and the rest of it. If we were able to get 12 months of data to see what happens in the different seasons, and now that we're away from the free rides and the 3 free rides and the other free rides, do you think that'll give us a good number for data collection to see what we need going forward, whether it's rate changes or whether it's different styles, different hubs, or different scalable aspects of a public transit plan?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. The more time we allow, the more data we can collect, the more statistics, the more KPIs, we can track all of that information and then make changes as we see fit. And certainly after a longer period of time, I can give you information on fees and usage and response times and everything. So the longer duration we go analyzing the program, the much better data I can provide.
And my last question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair?
Well, go ahead, Mark.
Through you. Part of the issue, it seems to me, has been that ridership was more than we imagined it would be in the beginning. There's a lot of reasons for that. Now, if ridership goes up, our contribution to this program from the various gas tax funds go up as well. Yeah. But we find out about that in the next year. So it's sort of, we build the case of our numbers, apply to the government, and then they have a formula to give it back to us sort of 6 months to a year later than the projections?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, you got it. So it's based on the previous year's service. So as the service increase, we will continually get a greater amount of gas tax back to us for the program.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, don't forget about that 1-year lag, which is unfortunate. Councilor Pierce, you had your hand raised?
If I could, Mr. Chair, not a question, but just a comment here. We've got 3 months of this service under our belt here. You could say it's interesting, there's other words that can be used as to how the first 3 months kind of played out. But looking back at it, it's kind of a blessing it worked out the way it did, because it allowed us to get some initial data and use that data, and we're already changing things as we're going forward here. So I think, like I say, we all kind of sat around this horseshoe going, oh, you know, kind of, it wasn't the way we had envisioned it starting out, but I think in hindsight now, when we look back at it, we've got ourselves in a better position now. And to the point of Councilor Laferriere there, I think all we need to do now is get the numbers and see what happens in another 6 months, in another year, and stuff like that. Personally, I haven't heard anything bad about it. I've used it a couple times myself. I've yet to be with somebody else in the vehicle, so I'm not sure how much that's happening and that sort of thing. But I think if people remember the fact it's a shared service transportation, it's not like a cab, and I think that's kind of, people have learned that in the first 3 months or so, that it is in fact that. But like I say, I think it's great, and we'll give it another year and see where we're at then. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Leslie? Leslie, Councilor Gower, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Leslie, the BTS service in the county had to add extra vehicles because of the demand when it was free. How many vehicles do they have in total now that they use?
So through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, they've added additional vehicles to service to better serve the community. So we need additional vehicles to serve those, most of the elderly, those with special needs. So we need more vehicles so that we're allowed to adapt to the app requests and then provide vehicles to those requesting through that. So that's why we have additional fleet. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
I just wondered how many they have.
Oh, sorry. Right now we are at 12 and we will have 15 by the end of next week.
Oh, wow. And the cost, the annual contract cost, previously the service that we offered to the specialized transportation program, while it didn't serve the ordinary everyday public, such as Councillor Pierce said he used it, it was for specialized users. The program was less than half of the cost that's here now. How are we going to get these costs down so that they don't continue to increase? And how does this cost compare to Bracebridge, for instance? They have a similar population to us, or our comparator municipalities. Do we know?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to answer your question about comparator municipalities, so our consulting group IBI gave all of that data as part of the transit study, that they had compared cost per service with all of our municipal comparators, and we are right in line with what we're offering as far as public transportation. I think that will be back to Councilor Ferriere's point, is that we need a year of data to sort of analyze the service, how it's growing, if it's going to continue to increase. That's also indicated in my report, that we need to be aware that that could and may possibly happen over the next year. And then I think after a year, we can look at, do we increase costs? Do we change the routes? Do we limit the times? Those will be decisions that I'll bring forward when we have some more data for you to consider.
Well, thank you, and we could look at the rates and how they compare. Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Leslie. For clarity, we had 5,400 rides booked, but only 3,200 rides completed. What made up the difference?
So you'll see there that, or through you, Mr. Chair, you'll see there through there that rides booked is actual requests coming in. So those are all the requests that come in, whether it's through phone, through the internet, through the app, and then the rides served are those that are actually delivered. So we're having quite an issue before the holidays with cancellations or no-shows. So those are the actual rides that were delivered. So we account for every ride that comes in as a request, but the actual rides served are those that are actually go from door to door. So,
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, is that ratio something we should worry about? Because it must screw up the logistics of this
Yeah.
venture.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think if they were to continue, yes, but we have some action plans in place to address that. So we're going to look at starting to, now that we're charging, we can actually continue to charge for the ride if we need to. We're going to send out warnings or sort of a reminder that you need to call if you've booked a ride to say that you no longer require it. So we're now able to kind of engage. We know some of our regular users. We can engage with them, remind them, communicate with them. So I think that will help.
Okay, no other questions? Leslie, I've got two. Some residents call or they email me to complain. Having talked to Sheena, I've gotten a lot better at being able to respond as far as managing expectations and all that. But if there's something that I can't answer or I think needs a more fulsome explanation, or any of the councillors do, or the mayor, who do we call on staff? Do we call you, or do we call Sheena, or email? Who do we contact?
I recommend, or through you, Mr. Chair, I recommend that you contact Sheena first as the supervisor of public transportation. She is your first point of contact. She has a direct line with BTS and can work with them and address the issue right away and get back to you. She's for your fastest response. I would still recommend going through her.
Okay, and again, it's a new program, everybody knows that. When will we see the next update?
I would suggest we bring back another one in approximately 60 days, another 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add one comment. I have an elderly resident. She has cancer. She doesn't drive. Her husband, also elderly, was put in a nursing home just recently. So this program allows her to visit him. So I desperately hope it succeeds. So, thank you very much. Okay, mover and seconder to receive this as information. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, see none. General Manager update. Cindy, do you have it? No? Okay. We found out about everybody else but Cindy. Any questions for Ms. Stevenson at this time? Okay, see none. I think she's been here quite a while. Development Services, there's no report per se. And Russ is here on behalf. No, sorry. Covering, oh, you're covering for Pam? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, your strategic initiatives. Any questions for Michael on Development Services? That can't wait till tomorrow night? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to E, Strategic Initiatives. Okay, reallocation project funding for arts, culture, heritage strategy, and this one is from Russell. Can I get a mover to get that on the floor? Okay, Councillor McAlpine, and we'll go Councillor Bell, because his name's easier to say. Does anybody have any questions on that? I thought the report was straightforward, but if anybody has any questions or would like Russell, okay. Okay, see no questions? Any comments, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. Strategic initiatives, Allison is away. Russell, is there any update that you would like to do? I'm fine, Mr. Chair. Okay, do we have any questions for Mr. Press? Again, he's a bright fellow, so don't waste this opportunity. Okay, we'll go over to F, Office of the CEO. Heather, you're looking, item 1. Is there anybody that would like to see a delegation for the Good Roads Conference coming up? Councillor Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, because we just got notification that we won't be meeting with the Minister for Roma, for the, is it natural, Minister of Environment for Roma? Can we try for this one to see if we can get back in?
Now that I don't know about, because they said in that email that they were
They'd get
going to
back
call
us,
us.
right? Yeah, but
So,
that's the only one I can think of.
what do you think? Should we try or
Well,
should we
they
wait?
have provided some staff contacts, but I don't know if maybe staff might have an opportunity to check in with them and see if we can make a delegation for OGRA. I don't know why we couldn't.
Okay. I think we should do a little more digging about, because I'd like to find out what they want to find out, but what we'll do, can you bring that forward at council? Anybody else, if you don't have one tonight, and I don't see any hands up?
Does that still, sorry, Mr. Chair, but I think council's passed the, oh no, it's the 31st.
31st, yeah,
we're good.
yeah, we still have time. Even if we approved it tonight, we'd still have to approve
True
it at
that,
council,
true
so. Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to item F2, Children's Safety Village. And there's a recommendation in there. I'm just trying to think. Okay, I guess what Michael's looking for is, well, he's got in the recommendation itself. So I'll ask for this to be moved from the floor. Okay, we'll go with Mayor Bailey and second by Councillor Bryan. Michael, do you want to talk about it a little bit? I thought it was a pretty good report. You got everything in there, you explained it, but I know there's a couple of questions, because I have a couple of questions, but do you want to cover anything off?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think what I would suggest is the county's got really two options on this. Well, they got three options. You could do nothing, I guess, and I haven't recommended that. I don't think that was it was implied when the Children's Safety Village was here. So the first option, the Children's Safety Village needs 1.5 to 2 acres of land. We have the land in Gainesville. They're interested in Gainesville as a site for their facility, which would include a village, and I think all of you have seen most of us have seen the village, as well as a classroom facility. So we could just lease them that land, and I've suggested a 20-year lease with 2 10-year extensions, which gets them close to the 50 years they were looking for. I think 50 years is a bit of a stretch to be leasing the public's land, but the other option is you could lease them the land for the village only, and then joint venture on a facility, a joint facility that would house both our community center project, which is pending, as well as their classroom facility. As part of my report, I presented a drawing, and that drawing was done by the Safety Village. It wasn't done by us. And what it shows, it's not a definitive drawing, but it does show that the two facilities could marry up and common space could be shared. Notwithstanding that, there's probably lots of challenges to that I'm sure reasonable people could get through, but there could be some challenges. So I personally believe in the community hub model, and I think it's proposed as a good model for future facilities. And so this could be a good community hub model. There's some risk. I think that some councillors have asked me about risks, and there are some risks. And so I think the risks would have to be dealt with in the next phase of this, would be through some negotiated agreement on how that joint venture could work. But the risk to this is that the biggest risk, I think, would be the Safety Village not being able to raise its money, and our project maybe being stalled for a considerable time while we wait for the Safety Village to raise its money. But as you said, I've provided lots of discussion in the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and that'll bring us to the portion question of this one. We'll go left to right. Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being a member of the former Gainesville Community Center Committee, when I looked at the plan, I assume that the entrances are still facing Ewart Drive or Ewart Road. And the previous plan, the community center, the parking lot was where the Safety Village is now in the dual plan. And the parking lot went right to the property line where the fire hall is. So if we did this particular plan with all the parking for both the Safety Village and the community center be out the back, and I'm wondering, okay, the parking has to go at the back, but the entrances are in the front. So that's the first question I had, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to the plan. As my report said, it was presented really for discussion and analysis only on the concept that what could the facility be shared? And I think the plan suggests that it could be shared, but I would be, I think I think my report even indicated that a final plan that would have to be developed by the two parties. So I can't answer any of those questions because I didn't prepare the plan. I wasn't involved with it. So it was prepared mainly just to show that the two facilities could marry and that there would be a savings in common space. And that I think clearly if council was interested in proceeding on this joint venture facility, I I think we'd have to pick an architect and go back to the drawing board to figure out how the joint venture building would lay out, how it would be situated on the site, how it would interface with the village itself, et cetera, a lot of things to be sorted out. But this plan is just a concept. It was prepared by the Safety Village, and I can't speak to it, so.
And just to piggyback on what Michael said too, keep in mind this is preliminary, and there's no, if we decide to go forward, there's agreements that have to come forward that we have to approve, so the devil's in the details too, so. As far as, yeah, I know what you're saying about the parking, but at the same time, yeah, this is still preliminary, so. Any questions on the recommendation? Okay, Joan, go ahead. Second one.
Thank you. My last question is to do with the servicing. We buy our water from the city of Brantford for this area, and the Children's Safety Village is going to service more children from the city of Brantford than probably Six Nations in the county. So I'm wondering if in the discussions that are suggested in the recommendation, if we could see if the city would consider donating the water for the facility as their part in doing good community work and contributing to the project. Because if we're going to pay the whole shot for the water bill, and I don't expect we would, or the hydro, I guess it's going to have to be determined based on usage, who pays what. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
So the question is, have we had any discussions with the city as far as water usage? Is that-
Well, or could we? Could
Okay.
we?
So you're making that a suggestion?
Yeah.
Michael?
Mr. Chair, it's my understanding the Safety Village has approached the city, and they are considering a commitment to the project, whatever project evolves. In terms of, could we talk to the city about, water cost? I mean, I think, as my report indicated, the details would have to determine how costs for, if we were to proceed with a joint facility, how costs would be apportioned. Those would include utility costs. I think it would be difficult to ask the city to donate a small piece of the water. We buy water in bulk from the city, and so it would have to be metered at the site and then shared according, so that, we could consider that in our discussions with the Safety Village, but again, there'll have to be mechanisms between the state, if council wants to go through with this joint venture facility, we'll have to have an agreement that would determine how both capital costs and operating costs are apportioned going forward.
Thank you, Mike. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some concerns, and I have talked to some staff about this. I think there is some leeway that can be worked together with making the two projects work, but I would much sooner see the community hall be a standalone building on its own. I worry that the Children's Safety Village does have to come up with, raise the money to build their building and whatnot, and if this delays the new community hall in Canesville, then I think that's not fair to our residents and whatnot like that. So I would rather see a standalone building. There's probably some ways of working the parking lot and whatnot like that for savings, but I think, to me, I would support a standalone building and go from there, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Michael, are we at that stage yet as far as standalone or a combined building? I thought, if I interpreted it, it sounded like you would like a combined building, but I'll leave it at, what's your take?
Mr. Chair, yeah, through you. So my recommendation is to lease land to the Safety Village for the village and to explore the opportunity to do a joint venture, joint building, combined building, whatever we want to call it. That's option 2 in my report. If it was council's wish to just have a standalone Safety Village classroom and the Safety Village off by itself on the site, then that would be option 1 that's laid out at the end of my report. So it's really, again, it's up to council, and I believe that the recommendation, which is for the the safety village and the joint build. If it's been moved and seconded, it could be either amended or defeated, and something else could be put forward. Hopefully that clarifies.
Okay, so I think what Brian would have to do is ask for an amendment to this, that we go with option 1. That's what it would appear. So,
Mr. Chair?
yeah, do you want to make the?
If you look at the report, there's two options. 1
I
and
did.
2.
Yeah, but 2 is built into that
And
recommendation.
I'm moving number 1.
Okay,
That's how I feel.
okay, what I'm gonna, yeah, but if I read the recommendation, it sounds to me like option 2 is in there. So what I'm gonna do is I'll go to you for an amendment before we do anything, okay? But we'll go around with any questions. And we're going left to right, so we're skipping. Counselor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Yeah, I like this idea. My only question is, and I know when they were in there, the statement they made is they need approximately 1.5 acres. What I don't want to see happen is us do the 1.5 acres like suggested here, and all of a sudden we're, 5 years down the road or whatever, 10 years down the road, and we've outgrown it again. I think if I'm figuring out the math right, I think there's still probably like 3 acres-ish left over. So is there a possibility to increase from that 1.5 acres, or is that kind of the thought process going in, that that's where we're gonna cap it for expansion?
Yeah, Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, so first of all, I think there's 4.5 acres. I'm not exactly sure, because we don't have we don't have a completed site plan yet for the community center, so it's just a concept plan, so. But there should be, it's approximately 10-acre site. We're gonna use about half of it, maybe a little more, a little less than half of it, for the community center and the fire hall. So there's 4 to 5 acres somewhere in there. So they've asked for 1.25, 1.5 acres. And I think that's all gonna have to be clarified before we finalize a lease, because they haven't done much beyond this preliminary work.
Right.
Until council can say, yeah, we're interested, and they can go and they can do a more concrete site plan. So in terms of expanding in the future, there's still a balance of land left. Council at some point will have to determine what to do with that balance of land to hold it. My opinion is we should continue to hold it. There's good uses for that land in the future. We don't know what they are yet, but there's it's a good thing. A land bank is a good thing for council to have. So.
Yeah, agreed.
And so, again, in the future, if they wanted more land to expand the village and council, the future was interested in that could be arranged at the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially growing municipalities. Counselor LaFerrier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question through you to Michael. I don't think this is going to happen. I don't want it to happen, what I'm about to say, but let's just say worst case scenario, 23 years from now, the Children's Safety Village is underfunded, it loses its grants, the volunteers, disband, they just don't want to do it anymore, they can't do it anymore for whatever reason. If we're in option 2, which is the recommendation currently on the floor, what happens to their share? Do we get a tenant, do they sell it off and we have a shared kitchen, shared areas, or how do we work that out so that we're keeping our interest in the community center ours?
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and this is really into the details of the agreement, and so the agreement can say lots of things. We have some joint ventures now for solar projects, and they actually contemplate both end of life of the asset as well as termination of the partnership midway through it. And usually what these things say is the dominant partner, in this case the county, as the owner of the site and the owner of the person with the asset demand, would usually end up with the assets. Now, there's usually some possible end-of-life language in that. Maybe there'd be a buyback of depreciated value. Those things can be in these agreements, or they cannot, depending on how much risk the council and the county wants to take on. So any joint venture agreement, any lease agreement, land lease agreements, and I've seen lots of land lease agreements in my time, usually have end-of-life, end of lease, or early termination language on how assets will be disposed of, and usually they just fall to the survivor. So that would be my intent when negotiating, to make sure that the county's future contemplates that maybe the partnership could dissolve before the end of the lease, and that the county wouldn't be left with a challenge, either you know, a new tenant that we don't have control over, or assets that are encumbered. So that's usually what we would arrange, and we would get legal advice through that.
Any further questions? Okay. Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
I was just curious at this point, because the Canesville facility is already quite a ways underway as far as the drawings going at this point, right? We had some initial approvals for it. How much of a holdup do you expect this to take if we do go with a combined building?
Yeah, and I apologize for that, because Brian did ask that. Will it delay the community center? Do we see that, Michael, delaying it a bit, or in further to what John said? How far along are we that we've committed with funds so far to, I don't know, drawings and whatnot?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So with the counties, we have an approved project, and we have a concept drawing. We haven't proceeded with working drawings at this time, and we haven't awarded an RFP to an architect. I think we've gone out to RFP, but I don't think we've awarded yet. So at this point, our intent, depending on what council does, is we'll either surge forward or we'll hold on that. But so we have concept drawings. We've invested in those, but we don't have working drawings. So we could go back to the drawing board, but there would be further expenditure related to that. In terms of the timeline, the safety village, it's my understanding, have to be out of their current site by the end of 2021. So if that's the case, then we probably would stay on schedule, because in order for us to get built, if we were to share a facility, we would need to keep at it, basically, and try to have and our project, we visualized starting to build it this year, finishing building next year, and moving in next year. And so we'd probably be close to that same schedule if the safety village was on board. The safety village has indicated they might try to extend their current agreement, but they don't know whether they can do that. So again, it really depends. I think in a perfect world, if we were to contemplate going into a joint venture with the safety village, we should delay our project. We should maybe to aspire to it start and finish a little later, so that we have the time to work with the safety village, have the time to go back out and consult with the public on a new design, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, that could extend six to 8 months beyond where we would see the current community center project moving at. So.
We're going to go to the amendment first, Joan. But Michael, my question is, the safety village is desirous of option one. Is that correct?
Option two, which is the
Sorry,
safety,
option
the safety village is quite interested in option two, primarily because, and as you can see from their drawing and from my analysis, they would save 2,000 square feet that they would otherwise have to build. That's the common space that would already be built in our community center that they believe they could share. So that's a savings and a benefit to them.
Okay. And so yeah, you've had those discussions. That's what they would prefer. Okay. We've gone around once. What we're going to do, you'll have another opportunity to kick the can there, Joan. But what I'm going to do, Brian, just to be clear, I'm going to read the very last paragraph here. For the reasons articulated earlier, staff feel that there is merit in exploring option two, and accordingly, the recommendation presented to committee is for staff to negotiate a lease for the lands required for the village portion of the project, and also to commence discussions, regarding a joint venture partnership for a shared facility. So having said that, that's the direction this recommendation would direct staff in. But if there's amendments to that, I will entertain them at this point. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would move that we prepare a lease agreement with the County of Brant and the Children's Safety Village for 1.5 acres of land, which is basically in the first paragraph of the recommendation. And then another paragraph was that we look at exploring some possibilities of parking lot or whatever else to help lessen the costs for both, and go a standalone buildings for both. Because that way, to me, it's much cleaner, and I like clean. And I think tying ourselves up, I'll speak to that after I get a seconder. How's that?
That's fair. I think we got the gist of the motions. Is there a seconder for, okay, Joan, you're going to second it? Okay, Brian, go ahead, speak to it, and then we'll go around and see if anyone else.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have, Kansville community's been waiting a long time for this. And we've had numerous issues over the years of trying to find a correct site, and I believe we've got the correct site. We're building a fire hall on it, and I'm fully supportive of the Children's Safety Village, by all means. But the possibilities of delaying this project a year or so, which could happen, and I think that, you know, if their funding was in place right tomorrow, it would be a great idea. I have some problems with the concept of their drawings. I know it's just an artist's drawings, but sharing facilities works all right, but when it comes into washrooms and stuff like that, for the public that is renting the hall or whoever, can be a little bit of a problem. And so I think there's some possibilities of some things, but I'd rather see this 2 standalone buildings, and we proceed with the Kanesville Community Hall. Thank you.
Okay. Joan, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to speak to Brian's amendment, or did you want to speak to the motion itself?
No, I'd like to speak to the idea about the lease of the land. We paid very dearly for that land, Mr. Chairman. It's industrial land. It cost us a lot for that, 10 acres. It cost the county taxpayers a lot. And it was mentioned to me previously that some of that land could be used for servicing Kanesville, such as a pumping station out in that area, and that it would fit right in because the water tower's there, the fire station, it's a municipal group of facilities, buildings there. I'm not opposed to the safety village either. I think it's a great thing they do. And my understanding was it was going to be behind the community center, but it would have a sign facing busy County Road 18, Children's Safety Village. They would have a presence with that sign because there's over 10,000 cars a day that go along there. And my idea was that the parking lot, the east side, could have a bus lane to bring the children in each day to come to the village in behind. And as Councillor Coleman has said, the parking lot could be shared. But I agree with a standalone building because I think it could cause rental issues. If someone rents the hall in the daytime and they expect to have the hall, and all of a sudden there's 300 children in these classrooms and umpteen dozen are using the washrooms, and there's a lineup, and, you know, they've paid $400 to rent the hall. I don't think they're going to be happy, and I think it could possibly affect other rentals in the future. I mean, I could be wrong. It's just my thoughts on it, but I agree it should be standalone. I think giving them an acre and a half at what we paid for that industrial land is a donation of well over $150,000, and we're just leasing it to them at a nominal rate as our contribution. So.
Okay, I think you're saying you're in favor of the amendment. Councilor Farrier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just speaking to the motion, the amendment. I was really torn when I read the report. I completely understand the CAO's report, and I think the intent is really, really good and strong. I support the Safety Village. I volunteered there, but I'm going to support the amendment. The reason I'm going to support the amendment twofold is, one, both councillors from that ward are speaking very eloquently and passionately to the amendment, and two, I saw what happened with the library and the SELAPS site. And that's something that we have more input, more control, more funding over. And, you know, SELAPS is on hold. The renovation of that was started before I was, some of that process was happening before I got on council. And it's on hold and don't know how long, and other projects are moving forward. And that's something we had a lot more control over. They don't have the same fundraising potential issues that another organization would have. And I know, unlike the SELAPS renovation, there's been a lot of community input, community support, community work and organizing done on this. So for those reasons, I'm going to support the amendment.
Any other questions or discussions on the amendment? Okay, I won't support it because, as noted in the report, there's reference to Scotland Community Center. I've seen it work. It works good. The devil's in the details. As long as that agreement's written up, we're okay, but that's how I feel on it. So, no other questions on discussion? Brian will put your amendment to the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, so we will go back to the original motion. I don't think we need it read. I think we got enough discussion. Okay, all in favor of the motion as amended? Opposed? Okay, so that will go forward to council at the end of this month. 10A, Michael, do you have an update for us?
I do, Mr. Chair. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Just a couple things. There was an email that came out a couple days ago for a save the date for our all-staff meeting. So this is something we've been doing for a few years right now. The former CAO and I brought this from the GRCA. It's something we did there, and we thought it was good. So it's a time for us to get all the staff together, and we do a bunch of presentations. I'm going to do a keynote address this year, and we're going to have a few staff members update the staff group on just a bunch of interesting projects that are going on here in the county. So I think it builds a good positive workplace culture, it builds teamwork, it builds a good atmosphere that we're all working together and that we have camaraderie here. So we encourage councilors to attend that. And so it is June 9th at the South Dumfries Community Center, and would encourage councilors to put that in their calendar and attend. We usually start with a little light breakfast, and then we get into presentations and try to have everyone back to work by the late morning. So. Jody and I are working on a delegation of authority bylaw and a comprehensive report attached to that. We had a good draft. I wasn't quite happy with it, and it's something we've never done before. So we've decided to defer that to February. That still puts us in line to have that in place for the start of the new committee structure. And the clerk and I have been working on the details of the new committee structure. We think we've got a good approach. But I think we just anticipate that there'll be probably some early growing pains, especially on what report goes to which committee. But I think over a couple months, we'll get through those growing pains, and we're optimistic that the new committee structure is going to work quite well. And we're also going to work on a new report format in time for those new committees, so stay tuned for that. We've been through a number of drafts of our financial plan, and Robin and the finance team and I are meeting on Wednesday, and so our target is to bring that to council in February, and I think we're gonna meet that target. We're a bit behind, but I think we want to get it right as opposed to getting it quick. So, looking to present council, I'll be looking to present council with a short report on some internal matters. I've got a few reorganizational matters to go over, and just a few other internal matters. So I'll be working with Mayor Bailey and the clerk, and I'm hoping to have either a special meeting or attach that report on to January's council meeting. So we'll sort that over the next few days. And Mr. Walton asked me to mention that there's a public meeting for the Paris Flood Control Project tomorrow night. I know that does coincide with PAC. The meeting starts at 6, PAC starts at 7, so councilors will have a chance to get out there. It's a project that doesn't influence a lot of residents here in Paris, but a few, and so we think that we can still make that work. I think the PIC was set before we moved PAC into the later date. So that's 6 p.m. tomorrow night at the fairgrounds. That's my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions for the CEO? Okay, see none, we'll move on. Item 11, there's no matters referred by council that we're aware of. So that'll bring us to 12A, and there's a recommendation from Councillor House. Can I get a mover for that? We'll go with Councillor House. Is there a seconder for that? Okay, Councillor Bell. Any questions at this point? Okay, is there any discussions of that recommendation? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed, as I mentioned in the minutes earlier from this committee, that there was no agreement from the committee to change their format into workshops. Unless I'm misunderstanding this, it states that we've seen increased effectiveness of working group format in other areas, such as the Brant Community Health Hub. That was a community committee that we appointed, Mr. Chairman, a member from council to. It wasn't a committee of council or appointed by council. We only appointed one member. The Brant E-Ride program was a county program and project, and the Scotland Community Centre project was done by a committee, including yourself and Councillor Chambers and a few other community members, but it was separate from the Recreation Advisory Committee. And so I guess I'd like to see the terms of reference for this committee, because I've heard that they are struggling since the business park is full and they can't promote business anymore because the business park is full. We don't have any other county land other than private lands. And so they're struggling, but they don't seem to get a new focus, I guess, for lack of a better word. And we've hired all this extra staff in that department, so I'm hoping that they can work together, because these are business people that we've appointed to this committee, well-respected business people in our community. And economic development is so important. When we had our strategic plan at Burford Community Centre, the most important thing that we had on the wall in those notes at the top was job creation. And that's what this committee was doing. But they're kind of struggling because there's nowhere to promote now. They can't promote Vacano's land or Abcott's land or some other developer's land. I mean, we have the list available of what's available for development, but I'd like to see this committee work with staff, and I think it's so unfortunate that we've lost some very valuable members from the committee in the last few months because of the suggestion of workshops. So that, I've said my piece, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not going to support this recommendation. I don't think that we should, it's fine to have workshops, but let's keep our Economic Development Committee, and maybe they only need to meet bi-monthly, maybe every other month, so that in between they can work on things for the next meeting. I don't know what the answer is. I've never sat on this committee, but I think they're very important, and they know the community, they know the people out in the community. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goward. We'll go with Councillor Bell. I seen his hand first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been a member of that committee. I spent the 4 years before joining council on that committee, and it's fair to say that we struggled to know exactly what our best contribution was. So we went through a process. When Alison arrived, we employed a consultant. We spent a lot of time workshopping that particular issue. What is it that this committee should do? And we reached the conclusion, and I think it was a unanimous conclusion, that this committee should meet probably every 3 months, and that it should focus itself on specific topics. Now, I'll give you some examples. We had one group that focused on helping Alison build the Economic Development Strategic Plan. I was part of a group that helped the county do the comprehensive zoning bylaw review. We have a standing group that does Salute to Brant, and they're very effective. Or those 3 were very effective, and there are more. And I think it's a matter of being creative about how best you can make that group work. As to the focus on land and shovel-ready acres, we agreed as a council to the Economic Development Strategic Plan, which said we would have 50 acres of shovel-ready land available And that should be the end of the story. There are so many more things around economic development other than the availability of land and the promotion of that land to potential developers or users. So I think what Steve has suggested makes very good sense. And my only question is, how the heck did we end up reversing a decision that we made at the tail end of the last term of this council around economic development, only to find ourselves in exactly the same position a year later, thinking, what do we do? The answer was set out 18 months ago. So I hope that people will just recognize that this has been studied, an answer was developed, it's supported by the Director of Strategic Initiatives, and I think I fully support what Steve is proposing.
Sorry, you said the director or the general manager? Okay, that makes a bit of a difference. Councillor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I guess a couple questions I have. First of all, we're talking working group here versus committee. My understanding of that would be the same thing, same type of thing we're doing with the Parks and Recreation. When there's things that come up, we get a working group together, as opposed to, here's a committee, we're gonna meet every month. Some months there might be nothing to discuss. I guess it all goes back to value out of time of, as Councillor Gatward said, these are professionals in our community that have volunteered to be on this committee, so I would suggest that we want to have the value add of their time. As far as the no county land, it's just private land, to me, I look at it in the sense that with economic development, you're going to try and represent anything that's within the county, so it doesn't necessarily have to be county-owned property that we're promoting here. As was suggested with our business park now, on the other side, maybe best case scenario is, you know, somebody else owns it, who knows, right? But I don't think we need to focus on just county-owned property for that. And I guess the final thing, again, is the fact, and Councillor Bell got into it, there's many other factors to the economic development rather than just shovel-ready land. And I would like clarification if I could. Councillor Gatward had suggested that there was members, she used a plural, that are no longer on the committee, that have stepped down from the committee because of this potential resolution. The last minute stated in there that one individual had removed himself because of personal reasons, medical reasons, so that's got nothing to do with what's been proposed here. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong here again, was the second person that we were speaking of suggested that if things were changed that they would resign, but there's been no resignation given to this point. So I don't think that was a correct statement stating the fact that we've lost several members because of this potential restructure. I am in favor of it. I was in favor of the way we redid Parks and Recreation. Again, it's all about people's valuable time. This isn't the only thing that people do. If we can, even if it's, you know, I think it's going to be more than that, but even if it's 2 or 3 meetings a year and they get to the meat of what is putting that forward, then I think it's fine. So I am in support of this, and that's it.
I think, Joan, we will get back to you about what we're going to go around. We'll go to Mark and then John. John? Okay, so we'll go to Mark and you ready for bed? We'll go to Mark and then we'll go to Steve.
So am I, to be fair. I was just going to say that. That was one of my points, is that the current council member on the committee is making the recommendation. It's seconded by a person who was on the committee for 4 years, who quite rightfully said this was decided 18 months ago. We just didn't act on it. And it was decided when there was quorum, and it was decided when there was a consultant's report, and it was decided, it sounds like, very thoroughly. This new structure, nobody's talking about that, and I think it's important. The new structure, I think, actually would allow for more opportunities for getting those people where their time is valuable on board for specific projects. So if we have something like we want to get a post-secondary institution, have a satellite campus here, that's a huge part of economic development. That's something that we might want to do. In the current structure, you may invite a person to speak to it once, but it may not be followed through because it's not the expertise or the passion of the folks on the committee. With this structure, we could have a working group on that specifically, where we could get heads of institutions, educational institutions, the high school, school boards, all working together to give us really good advice, but not be committed to a monthly or bi-monthly meeting, but project focused. And that's just one example. I think the other piece too, it was alluded to that, you know, we had this with, this wasn't how E-Ride worked. Actually, it kind of was. We had a working group, you were on it, Councillor Cardy was on it, John Pierce was on it, I was on it as a citizen, and it evolved. It's no longer here because that part happened, and it may come back in some future form, like it might be a transit users group in a year from now. Great, wonderful. But that change needs to happen. Just because something's been there before doesn't mean it's the most effective use of anyone's time at this time. And again, we have the member and a member who had 4 years on that committee, both in agreement. I'm supporting this.
Okay, Councillor House.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to respond a little bit, and I respect Councillor Gatward's questions and comments, and one in particular that I wanted to address was, I think she was asking, you know, why am I bringing this recommendation forward as opposed to, you know, a motion from the committee itself?
And I would have asked that same question, so
Right.
yeah,
And
you
it's
can
fair-
answer my question. at the
It's a
same
fair
time.
question, and the answer is in this, which is the Strategic Economic Development Strategy and Action Plan, which was a document that a lot of people worked really hard to prepare, and this council spent time reviewing and finally approved. And one of the elements within that plan, in Pillar 2 of 4 pillars, is to improve stakeholder engagement. And specifically, it says, have council review the role of County of Brant Economic Development Advisory Committee, including terms of reference, which I have here in case Councillor Gatward wants them at the end of the meeting, including terms of reference, to ensure that the advisory function of this committee to council is clear in terms of expected topics, expected level of engagement, committee structure, and reporting. Assess the requirements and value add of the committee in the context of both the economic development strategy and the corporate strategy. So I believe it's our responsibility to provide a format which will be the most effective to improve stakeholder engagement. And I believe strongly that we have an opportunity here to improve stakeholder engagement. Joan used the word struggling at least once, and she's absolutely right. This committee has been struggling, and I am confident that by moving to this format, we will have an opportunity to improve stakeholder engagement. As was mentioned by some of the others here around the table, there are people who cannot commit to a monthly meeting. Business people, as Councillor Gatward said, that's primarily who makes up this committee. There are lots of business people around our community who would be great contributors on the subject of economic development, but they won't commit to attending a monthly meeting. They would potentially commit to attending a workshop on a topic that interests them. That's the background behind my recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else want to speak? John? Well, we're going to go, Councillor Gatward had her hand up, so I'm going to go to her. I think she wanted to respond to a couple things. And yeah, I don't want to hold up too long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to address a couple of things that have been said here. First of all, Councillor Pierce said plural, and yes, it is plural. There's been a letter submitted from the former Assistant Deputy Minister of Economic Development from the province of Alberta. He was sitting on this committee, and he has resigned. What a shame that we're losing him. What a shame. He is our city representative as well on the City Economic Development Committee. And I'm really upset that this is happening. In addition to the other one that's in the minutes, the one I just mentioned is resigning. I don't know how many more, but there has been others previously. And I did not say they can't commit to monthly meetings. I said perhaps bi-monthly meetings would be more suited to this type of committee. I did hear when Councillor Bell was on there, and I've talked to some of these members, that he brought forward lots of great ideas, and things were positive. But there hasn't been a lot of positivity, and I think that's why the members are discouraged. And I think that we need to take a step back and respect the people that applied for this position. They've only been in this for 1 year, and I think we need to look at revamping the committee. They were told that, yes, we're going to look at the terms of reference, and you mentioned that. It was never done. We didn't do it. I asked tonight to see it because I don't recall us ever discussing this or what their focus should be. So I don't support the recommendation. I think that it's just not right. These are business people that are smart and they want to serve their community, and the workshops are fine if we have a working group, if we want to have a satellite campus, as Mr. LaFerriere mentioned. Sure, we can set up a special working group for that, but let's not throw these people under the bus until we know for sure how we want to handle economic development and how they can work with staff. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Joan. No more other discussions? Okay, I'll call the vote. I will say, though, I appreciate, Councillor House, your answer to my question. I would have preferred this come from the committee, because I think it would have been kicked around there, because I have spoken to a couple members who weren't supporting it, but you may. So, having said that, I will ask all those in favor, please stand. And you let me know when they can sit. Yep. Okay, thank you. And all opposed, please stand. You got them? I counted them quicker than the first one.
I know, sir.
Okay. So that motion passed, and again, that will go to council at the end of the month. Can I get a motion to go on camera, please? Okay, moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor Coleman. All in favor? Opposed, none? We will, because there's two gentlemen here,